started recording 5 minutes early, so we are live for those joining.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Glenn, I see you. Ed, can you hear me, Ed? Ed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. We are live. I started early because I hit the wrong button. But I'd rather be live than dead.
Me too. Me too.
We
Dave.
don't want to go to that dead part right now from where I'm like sitting.
Okay. The others will join shortly, I'm sure.
Well, it's early. We're 4 minutes early.
Yeah, everybody will be switching over. The other meeting just ended.
Well, Glenn, you get the a lot of sympathy for broadcasting from the hospital room.
Like there's a whole lot else for me to do right now.
Just get better, Glenn. That's all.
Yeah, I'm hoping we get out tomorrow. I just had a nasty bout with sclerosis in the leg.
Okay, just remember, Glenn, we are recording. This is live.
That's fine. It says
Okay.
I got an IV in each arm. It says
Yeah, I just had to remind you about HIPAA. That's all.
Like he can disclose his own personal.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure that he understood what he was doing. That was all.
No problem. My insurance company is well aware. So
I would have assumed you were, but I just want to make sure. That's all.
how's the weather today?
Disclosure person.
How's your weather today?
We had a lot of drizzle and very little rain. It was sort of soggy and wet, but no snow.
Okay.
We had lucked out. We were on the right side of 95.
Yeah. You'll start to get the snow numbers in starting this Friday, because that'll be the first check of having to pay all the overtime to the personnel in the village. That's when you get to pay for that 3-day storm.
Yeah.
You know, you got a 2-week leg, so this Friday is going to be the first day that we get that the bill for that week's worth of storm, Sunday through Friday. And then I believe I sent everybody a copy of the certiorarities that are open, outstanding with the village, the town of Amerenik.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. Glenn, have you able to ascertain what the magnitude of the issues are that the village faces with that?
It's like I said, what you have to do is you have to look on the sheet of anybody who's filed for anywhere from 6 to 10 years. 10 years is usually when they have to go to court, and that's when it's settled. And you have Avalon Bay sitting right there. And unfortunately, I'm trying to do this on my iPhone, but I will go through. But there's other cases on Amerenik Avenue and such, where you're going to see they filed for 6 years, 7 years. They're not, town of Amerenik wasn't as efficient as Rye. I will go back to them and see if they have estimates of what our exposure is for those years. Because, on the Rye next side, directors, which is in its 10th year, if they got their druthers, it would be $260,000 liability to the village. They average about 26,000, looking for $26,000 in reductions over the last 10 years. 3 years of that we have to defend, because at that time we still had an assessor's office. On the town of Amerenik side, I believe we're going to have to defend a couple of years of Avalon Bay. And then I will look, slowly but surely. If I get home tomorrow, I can actually put the spreadsheet down and give you basically the list of ones that have 5 or more years already filed, I can pretty much guarantee they're all going to file for this year.
Mhm.
And you'll see the increase. Specifically, I'm looking for that CVS on Mamaroneck Avenue that's now a church. We have the Chase Bank, which is now a synagogue.
Okay, let me interrupt you for a minute, Glenn. Ellen, we are live.
Yep.
It's just so you know. And Victor, you've been promoted to a panelist, so you can speak at any time you wish.
And Bill Spiro emailed me saying he's accidentally deleted his link. So I suggested he go to the website, join as an attendee, and you'll promote him.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Ellen. Finally, glad, nice to see you. It says
Yeah,
I get your infamous emails all the time.
yeah. I hope they don't annoy you. What?
Oh, no, not at all. I find them quite informative. In fact, a couple of the points that you were making, I was looking at too, and that's what we asked about, the money for, how much they were, the money at the pavilion and
Yep.
parking revenues and such,
Yep.
fines and forfeitures, and the fact that they were very aggressive with the different, they didn't get into the smaller things. We could do that later, like why is the fall softball up, $14,000 year over year, even though we didn't use it last year. The other one, I was asking is they have bought a bunch of equipment, and right now some of it's not assigned. Some of the health center, they said that they put it into the bond. I'd seen that previously in the budget, and those are the type of things. What I've spoken to Dan about is when they do a capital project, what we have to do is follow the capital project. You wanted the capital project, we did it, it was paid for, and then how it was paid for. That way we know exactly where the spending is going to be on any given capital project, whether they're going to take it out of the general account, they're going to future bond it, they've already bonded it, or through donations like the 3 police cars this year, and then fire equipment.
Right. So one of the things we had discussed as a group before you joined the committee, Glenn, and it was in our capital budget recommendations, guidelines to the Board of Trustees. So I'm glad Victor's joined in addition to Dan being here, is that when we do the budget, we include the debt servicing for what may be bonded during the year. The budget
Yeah.
historically has been done based on what the payments are at that time. So
Yeah.
if we're going to be issuing bonds during the year and have to make payments on it, it needs to be included in the budget.
Yeah, I actually asked about that because they said that they had just finished issuing the bonds that they had approved. I think it was back like in July
Mhm.
for 5 something million. They actually said they had just issued those bonds. Therefore, they'll have to adjust next year's budget to the fact that we'll be paying interest on that.
Right, no, that's not what I'm talking about. So they just issued those bonds. If there are any payments on those bonds prior to the end of this fiscal year, those payments are not included in the budget.
So they have to be included in the budget.
So we need to make sure any mid-year bond issuance, the payments are included.
Yes, that's what I just said. I said it poorly, but I
Okay.
agree with- I
As long
agree
as we're on the
with-
same page.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. The other thing is, as we're discussing the funds, both the sewer fund and the water fund, which is going to be, the water fund, I'll tell you right now, is going to be way out of whack. And I understand that's paid for by the water rates, but what we have to understand as a budget committee is if it's not paid by the water rates, we, the village, simply transfer it out of our general fund and have to cover the cost.
Yep.
So we have incurred a lot. If you actually looked, every budget meeting, they have a line called meter that's not in the budget book we have. It's a separate line, and that's used for the hydrant rentals and all the other expenses that are coming down. And it's all listed under capital. And I've kept track of that, and we have done a significant amount of work that exceeds the current fund balance of the water fund. So one of them, unfortunately, we're gonna have to carry on the books because Flagler Avenue is in a lawsuit of, are we responsible or is it a private road? But there's other projects that have been done. And they do the same thing with the sewer line. The sewer line hasn't been that great, but we did basically approve the projects to be in line with the order from the feds, environmental protection. So we did authorize a $5 million project, of which I believe we're getting $1 million back in funding. So that $4 million is going to be carried to the point we go out and bond it. And that's one of the other thing I'm worried about. I know we have $4 million in a debt fund, you know, and I know we
Okay.
have the 10,
I
12
need to interrupt this discussion. I need a motion to open the meeting.
I moved to open the meeting.
Second.
Okay, Ed is opening, Glenn has seconded.
I second.
Okay, and you've thirded it, Ellen. Favor of opening the meeting, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the meeting is officially open. I apologize for having started it early, but hitting the wrong button and
Do
not.
we have quorum present right now, Dan?
We have a
Yes.
quorum present, and I know Charles and Bill are trying, well, Bill has just joined us, and I know Charles is trying to.
And what happened to Len?
I don't know where Len went to. Let me send an email.
We need Charles in charge.
Bill's here.
Hey, Bill.
Hello.
Hi, Bill.
Greetings, Ellen. Thanks for your suggestion. I did manage to retrieve my link.
Oh, good.
But just to finish the thought that, you know, we have a lot of stuff that was listed under unencumbered. When you led last year's report, I'd kind of like to know what those unencumbered items were and how we took care of them. And like I said, the water fund, you have a water meter line. After they go through the audit of the bills, they have a water meter line, and all your water expenses are there. And then you have a sewer line, all your expenses are there. The sewer line, we have enough money right now in the reserves, but like I said, we did do the consent order. We've got I think like 4 or 5 sections of the village, about 80%, 85% of the village under contract. The contract was for a little over 5 million. We got $1 million worth of funding, and the other 4 million is going to eventually have to be bonded. And then, of course, once they start ripping up the roads, you're going to find out, we also have a consulting contract that was engineering consulting contract for the rest of the work that has to be done in the village. And I'm sure that that's going to have to be started within the next year, because I believe our consent order is October 2022 or something like that. Dan would have the exact date. So, and then, I asked them, we have a police car. They haven't done it, but they haven't taken delivery on it. And then they had $465,000 worth of dump trucks, sanitation trucks that they had bought. And they're not sure how those are paid for, and they're not sure how they're funded.
Okay. I know that Charles is having trouble, is still trying to get on. And Susan is having the same problem. They're both here. Just a minute. They just arrived. Hold on. I'm fantastic that I can do this. I don't believe it. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yay.
Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Welcome, Lynn. Welcome, Charles. Welcome, Bill. We are live. The meeting has been formally opened. We've been having a rambling discussion about certain aspects of the budget. Charles, I'm going to turn it over to you, but before I do, I'd like to just simply say I was very impressed and appreciative of Jerry, Augie, and Laura's explanations and the work that they have done. I think there's additional work that still needs to be done, but I was impressed with answers to the questions that were provided.
I was also impressed that we asked that the schedule be moved a month early. I was very impressed that they got as much done as they did so early.
Okay, Charles, it's all yours. Victor has joined us and he's been promoted to a panelist as well.
Congratulations, Victor.
Sure. So if we could have a motion to open our February budget advisory.
Charles, we
meeting.
already did that.
Oh, you
we
did
already-
that. Great.
We had a quorum, and so we just moved ahead, assuming that others would be joining us.
Wonderful. And if we could have a motion to approve the minutes from the January 19th meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So Charles, a quick question on that. Are you going to send them over to Sally or you want me to?
I can forward them to her. Thank you for putting them together. Can we actually have a volunteer to take the minutes this month?
Don't everybody say yes. Ellen, can we impose upon you?
No, she did it last month. Let's go. Come on, everyone. Someone who hasn't done it yet should step up.
Thank you, Len. And I'm going through eye surgery, so you're
This
not
is
going to want me to take the minutes.
This is not rocket science.
Unfortunately,
The minutes are not verbatim minutes. There's summary minutes and action minutes. So
unfortunately, I'm in a hospital bed right now, so I'm using my medical card.
You all right, Glenn?
Yeah, I'm just dealing with a leg infection. I'm on antibiotics. Hopefully I'll be home tomorrow, but it's been taking me over a week, so it's kind of a little stressful.
Good luck. Get well.
Thank you, sir.
So, Dan, you
maybe Ed or John can volunteer for tonight. And
I'll do it for tonight. I have some other stuff during the week, so I may not get them out as quick as Len and.
they do not have to be extensive.
I will pre-volunteer for next month.
Great. Sorry, I'm just gathering my screen share. So, Ellen, thank you for attending the 5 o'clock today. I was in a meeting, I couldn't be there. Was anybody else from our group able to attend as well?
Yes.
Ed and Glenn were there,
And Len?
And Len
and Bill was there.
and
as
Bill.
well.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. That's
Yeah,
great.
So you were well represented.
Wonderful. Did Anyone have anything that they wanted to share at this juncture as a takeaway from that we think would be relevant for the items that we were planning on discussing tonight?
I think there were questions that were raised about revenue projections and assumptions, that they might be a little tight. At the end, as a board member, I raised the issues of we basically have to decide as trustees whether we can take out of the reserves, exceed the 2% cap, or take a more, totally, take a harder look at everything and postpone what can be postponed and look at alternatives to reduce the budget if needed. I think that's a quick summary of what we discussed.
I also think one of the scary points that was raised was that we don't have the village engineer. We don't have the village attorney. So it's not just their salaries, it's the 81% in fringe benefits. That's going to eat up the remaining 2% in the cap and then some.
Also, what Jerry has told the board, but it was discussed briefly, is a doubling of the sewer project from 5 million to 10 million.
Yep.
And that the engineering portion of that to monitor and control is, if it's like the last one, is somewhere, a couple $100,000 to $500,000.
Yeah.
So so one of the topics tonight was to touch on the questions that we had aggregated, and then subsequent to that, Ellen had put together a pretty extensive list of revenue related questions based on the documents that were distributed to us. So maybe we can go through those and talk about a plan for next steps with distributing them and when and to whom. Just before I take this down, so can you see my screen share with the memorandum up, or are we looking at the agenda right now?
We can see it.
Okay. So Len had taken a very proactive role in the prior year amongst other people in this group with trying to attend these. So it's upon us, and we might want to kind of go around the horn and maybe distribute a schedule amongst ourselves as to who thinks they can make what meeting, so we can try to have some representation at these. Dan, I guess assuming that these are once again open to the public.
Is this the one that was sent out today?
The 8th, yesterday, or dated yesterday.
It was sent out. It should have been sent out last night. There was an earlier one. It appears that this is the final. Yes.
I never saw this.
It
They
should
just-
be, it should be
Yes.
Today,
emailed.
Ellen, we got it today.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just went over this last night at the trustees meeting, so they probably didn't send it out until after 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I didn't get this.
And I believe that we are invited to at least observe these meetings.
You're
But
invited to every meeting, and by agreement that you would have it at least 15 minutes at the end to make suggestions, comments, observations, or whatever. That might be able to, like today, we're actually able to be part of the discussions. But I think that's going to vary from meeting to meeting.
for my part, I'm pretty flexible. I can virtually make all the meetings. My business is online, so when I do and don't work at that business is entirely up to me.
So yeah, this is going to move fast, and there are quite a lot of them. Does anyone have any suggestions? Whether we just communicate. You just did, Glenn, but who else is able to attend when, and we can just see where we land with just making sure that we at least have somebody at most of these.
Well, certainly, I know, Charles, this is Len, that I could certainly cover some of them, and I'd like to cover at least the capital budget and, one or two of the others.
I
Great.
think what you should do is there are some that I think they're all important, but some may be larger impacts than others. And you may wish to prioritize what's, where, who's going to take what in that order.
I should pretty much be able to attend all of them.
Wow,
Okay.
Yeah.
great.
So I think we're going to be in pretty good shape.
It
If
sounds
Glenn
like
and
that's great.
myself and Ellen, I don't know about Ed or Bill.
I should be able to attend most of them. I can send out a list to everybody in the next thing, which ones I can attend.
So what I would suggest, Charles, is you might want to, at least 2 days before, each meeting, say who's going to be at that meeting. Just to ensure coverage.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if somebody isn't attending and has a question, maybe a few days before, develop some questions, and somebody who was at the meeting can answer any questions of anybody who might not be able to attend any particular meeting.
Yeah.
That would be great if you can keep the distribution going, just keep everybody posted when you're planning on going. If you have preemptive questions going in, maybe share that with the group. I can continue to aggregate questions so we have those as a running list and for the record. And then if there are takeaways from the meetings that bring up questions or critical points that you want to in a live way communicate that with the group, if everybody can feel free to just keep that process going, because it can build even though these are specific. That's great. So I had forwarded along our operating budget actions document, kind of following our deliberating what would be the best way to handle that. So that's out there now. I haven't seen any comments come back. Dan, do you have any feedback to date and possible next steps and questions for us, et cetera?
I think that your input is going to be well received. I think that you may wish to focus on the larger picture as to the smaller items and some of the conceptual issues, in terms of, what do we need to do to make the budget a little bit easier and more flexible? So if things go wrong, they don't. We have the ability to do things. I will tell you that there was, I thought some really good probing questions and suggestions that came out of this meeting. What we did learn is that we are going to get about $1.1 million back in terms of federal assistance from the storm and COVID expenditures. But I don't think we can count on that to balance budgets.
Well, that was for the use of the reserve. We still didn't get an answer on the net number. And in Jerry's spreadsheet or Augie's spreadsheet, both on the expenditures and projected expenditures for the full fiscal year, quite frankly, was very confusing. And that's really important because that in many respects is the starting point. And Alan and the rest of us we're very concerned about the, the somewhat optimistic revenue growth. I think certainly Victor, you, Dan. So that's a real concern. And then finally, big picture, Dan, is the fact that about between 70 and 75% of the budget is people. And if we have retirement, medical, and other expenses growing more rapidly than the 2% property tax increase, another year or two down the line, I don't know if I'm being alarmist, but could be problematic because the personnel costs are growing more rapidly than our revenue base.
Just one point on that. When they talk about the 2% increase, that does not include the retirement. The retirement is allowed in the budget as not as part of the 2% increase. In other words, when we talk about the 2% increase, those retirement costs are in addition to whatever increase that we have.
So are you saying it's effectively a larger increase from a revenue?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
But when you do look at the calculation of the cap, the 700,000 or so in the more recent one wasn't even close to 2%. In other words, there was an allowable amount for increasing property taxes. And at least from what I took a glance at, I couldn't understand why it was lower than the actual calculation of the 2%. So there are other factors in there, no doubt. So
Well, you just had a revalve in Rhinebeck, so you might have a higher starting point for your value of your property tax.
yeah, that I don't know, although some of us live in Rhinebeck. And the reval went a very comfortable direction from where I live. But that said, I just think, I don't know, somehow I get a little bit concerned about the rate of growth in our personnel expenditures and how we've been relying on non-property tax revenue to help balance the budget. That has grown fairly rapidly, like we heard about sales tax, for example, and other fees. And Jerry's working creatively to try to increase the non-property tax revenue, no doubt.
But, Len, to your concern, what we're telling the public is we've come in under a 2% cap. Most people think it's a straight 2%. Not that the increases exclude certain fees or costs, and the expenditures that have skyrocketed are the ones that are excluded. So people's taxes could end up going up more than 2% at the end of the day.
Exactly. And non-property tax revenue side, I think they're aggressive. I think they're 14% increase this year. They're being very aggressive with certain lines. We did discuss it at the meeting. The largest one, which I'm sure was the question from everybody, was the sales tax. And their sales tax projection is actually right on where it should be. We've at this point collected $2 million worth of sales tax. They're projecting 3,970. And with the 1% increase we got a couple of years ago, we are actually going to be at that number. Right now, we're like $4.2 million short of our revenue side. 2 million of it's going to come from sales tax. Where the other $2.2 million on the revenue side comes from, that would be your question.
Right. So I think number for renting the pavilion deck and putting up a tent on the beach for $100,000 in revenue at $500 an event, I think that's extreme.
Yes,
I don't see how that's going to happen. And then I believe there was another 25,000 in revenue for the Keeps Pavilion to rent that.
Yeah.
I don't see all of this happening. And a lot of those revenue assumptions are based on no pandemic. And I don't know about you guys, but I can't get an appointment for a vaccine, so I may not be vaccinated until May or June.
no, you're looking at best with the vaccine somewhere between July and August.
I
By
hope not. I'm over 65, so I hope I'm not that late.
Yes.
oh no, I'm talking the overall public.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't see people being all that comfortable going back to normal that quickly.
Well, I think for outside activities, Ellen, it is likely because the infection rate for outside activities is, relatively small.
Yes and no. It's still there. So if someone's renting the pavilion for a large party, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I think the parking revenue is based on everyone's going back to work immediately.
Yeah.
Well, no, the parking revenue, Glenn and a number of people questioned at that meeting.
Yep.
It just, people aren't going to be going back to the office.
No.
As it was before.
Yeah, even Jerry said he was comfortable with my 70–80%. So that is.
And I
gonna
think
be-
that might be too high, Glenn.
Yeah.
Better
Well,
than where we are now, but
like I said, at this point, we're 603,000 below the quote 2%. And to be realistic, when they come back with their tentative budget, that should be included, and then we can start working numbers even further. I think what they did was the trustees told them, this is what we want you to come in at, and that's what they did.
Can you see Ellen's spreadsheet that I have pulled up?
Yes, it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so what is, amongst other things, but what's really jumping out is the property tax that, out of the gates this year, it felt like we were doing reasonably well considering the environment, and that comparatively to other counties, which made sense, we were doing extremely well. And now the shortfall versus the historical is certainly more dramatic than I think we would have expected. And I guess is that a correct number, that a little over 1 million year to date? And then to Ellen's point that you're, then trending for 22 or projecting for 22, a 3-year, historical high at a $4 million projection. And that's a big number. If you do.
So they talked about this extensively. Dan Sarnoff is supposed to send out the documents, a series of emails, and the payments that we've received to justify the sales tax estimate.
Yeah, I believe we've gotten 2 payments of over $1 million each so far. We expect another one before the year ends, and then the third one will actually probably be, let's say, like September 1st, 2 months after the end of the year. And then they just, they do the accounting that they have to do to put it against this year's revenue, add it to this year's revenue.
So this million year to date, do we know that when that's as of?
It's now, they say it's now 2 million. They got the second payment. And that would be as of today.
Okay, well, that's
They
huge.
expect two more payments
And then they expect
by
2 more.
year end. Yeah.
It's usually 60 days after the quarter ends. So if the quarter ends March 31st, your next payment would be just around June 1st. And then if your next quarter, you know, when the quarter ends, it's 60 days after that. And then, the June payment would probably be like September 1st.
But Augie said he was going to accrue it.
Yeah. He was gonna give the exact number for the second payment for the sales tax.
Yep.
And we now have a way to follow that because New York State actually posts the sales tax that Westchester County collected basically the 25th after any given month. So they have the monthly revenue there. So if we can get a breakdown of the monthly revenue for this year, we can literally look any single month. And if it's up, if Westchester collects 6% more, we can pretty much, add 6% to whatever whatever we did last year. If it's down 3%, it would be down 3% compared to last year. We're not talking about apples and apples. So it's actually something that we as a board can start to follow on a regular basis.
So just taking a quick step back. So on the agenda was the operating budget recommendations in the current environment. And I would think that, there is so much in there that could be used as a valuable tool by both us and, during these work sessions and by the board, et cetera. Similarly with the capital budget framework, which was a, less date specific framework, that was going to be put forth to be adopted. Dan, can you provide an update on that? And then we can maybe use that as a sequitur with, just how to expect to be able to use the operating budget action framework that's now in front of everybody going into these sessions, and kind of where we're at with both of those.
I think it would be helpful. Neither the capital budget nor the operating budget recommendations have been discussed at the board level. They've been received at the board level. They've been sent to staff for review. Staff has not reported. So I can't give you an answer to I guess the question, but I think the issue becomes, I think you should frame your questions for the different meetings and saying, as we had recommended in whatever, how does this work? Or maybe we should, what's the issue in here and how do we address it? I think you try and weave it in. I mean, the things that you have been doing or discussing tonight are all very valid and significant questions. And I think they need to be posed to the, at the appropriate meetings to go through them. And, we can either do it in writing or orally or both. I think, that's a question of, how you guys and gals want to.
And Dan, with that, is there carved out time for public comment at the work sessions, or is the answer to that no? And then
The answer is that per last night's discussion, the Board of Trustees will allocate a minimum of 15 minutes at the end for the Budget Committee to give suggestions, comments, ask questions, et cetera. Tonight's meeting, the Budget Committee was allowed to join in throughout the meeting, which I thought was very effective. What happens for the future, but I think you should plan on being able to do both.
Okay, and it's not just to be able to check a box that a document is adopted or memorialized or in use or in front of people, but it's really to try to be able to use it as a working tool. And if we do that, as we're attending to be able to have our, questions and recommendations organized within that framework, but that, the board and Jerry and Augie will also be able to anticipate that those are the type of things that, we're going to be focusing on. I think that'd be helpful.
Great strategy, Charles. Great strategy.
And then with that, did anyone want to talk any further about that? And again, we can use the capital budget framework as well for that meeting. And then, our forward plan is to take the operating budget framework and have that evolve into a more universal tool that's less focused on this specific window in time, and that'll be work for the committee to undertake going forward. But did anyone want to talk further about any of that and the document and where we're at and how to use it and the meetings, etc.? Okay, great. So as a sequitur from there, we have, further questions. So I have Ellen's spreadsheet pulled up that can certainly be used as a reference to try to get through, a number of the questions that she's presented. And then I'll continue to take questions from the group to be distributed, so we can have those in front of us.
Could I just ask a question, Charles? I want to follow up on Dan's point about the committee would be allowed 15 minutes, or members of the committee. I assume if we look at the schedule, that would be before or by April 13th, which is in that timetable there where the board, I guess, it's called the budget review, including revenue and expenses, if necessary. So I think we as a committee would probably want to have our input, at least on next year's budget, to the extent we do that, prior to the adoption of the budget, and with sufficient time to provide input that may be acted on. So I think that's something that would hopefully add some value. And that might build off the framework that Charles said. And then just finally, and then I'll shut up, is given the fact that we're going into what is going to be a challenging year, no doubt, I think we have to be as specific as we can, as we just did at the 5 o'clock meeting, as several people did. And I think that would be a good thing for us to do verbally and in writing before by the end of March or so.
And I think I agree with you, Len. And in order to do that, if we need to meet more than once a month, we should.
Yeah.
Even if we make sure that after a meeting with a specific department, the next day, anybody who has any questions or anything else, we could always send out emails and come up with a list of follow-up questions on anything from any particular presentation by any department.
Yep.
So in looking at the schedule, so we're not going to be meeting until the 9th, let's say, and that would be after the village manager HR, and then we have an upcoming with the clerk treasurer, and that's the one. I mean, I'm sure they'll be involved with all of these discussions to some degree, but that this is carved out on the 24th as a clerk treasurer presentation. So we're not going to be meeting as a group again prior to that, and then we're not going to be meeting as a group prior to Jerry's presentation with HR, which is a big one with all of the salary components being discussed. So to Glenn's point, being able to kind of keep the questions moving as a group for these, and if there's anything that we want to discuss about these. But then, and then also to Len's point, you know, when we really want to set our own milestone within this framework, within this schedule,
Yeah.
because it has the budget review on the 13th, and then on the 26th, the adoption. So to Len's point, we don't want to be scrambling in here. So do you want to target coming off of maybe the village manager meeting on March 1st, somewhere between March 1st and when we meet on the 9th?
That'd be fine.
I'm sorry, what date did you want to meet?
Well, if we're meeting on the 9th, you know, so that we're not, you know, scrambling on the 9th to integrate and then come up with a forward plan for the remainder of the sessions. It's not just when we would want an interim meeting, but what is strategically the best time to kind of recap where things are, be able to get our bearings and start the process of being able to come up with, you know, our analysis and recommendations. I mean, a midpoint at this point.
It may be appropriate for us, Charles, to have a meeting on the 9th and then a meeting on the 15th or just after the 15th of March to sort of, now that's before the capital budget. I get that, but the operating expenses is a bigger nut perhaps. And well, I've heard from all of the departments, and we could, you know, we might be able to be in a position shortly thereafter to get something together. I don't know what Dan thinks. If we have something to the board by or before the end of March.
I think that's good. I think the capital budget is the last.
That's, you know, that gives plenty of time because the 13th is still a couple of weeks away. So maybe we don't have to be that aggressive. I don't know.
I think we do, because we always go back and forth.
Yeah, that's true. Yes. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
so you want to read around the 15th is what you were saying?
Or the
So
16th.
Can't meet the 15th, we can't meet the 16th, we could meet the 17th or 18th if you wanted.
I can't meet on Thursdays because of ad hoc ethics.
Okay, so we could meet on Wednesday, the 17th?
Yep.
So
Is that
we'd meet the 9th and the 17th.
Yeah,
St. Patrick's Day.
Yep. So we'll wear green.
And Patrick's Day in a pandemic. It's not the same.
No, it's not.
I'm sure on the 17th, we will not have the mayor in attendance at our meeting.
It's okay, he's not in attendance at our meetings generally.
We just need to make sure that we let Sally know.
I'm doing that now.
Okay.
I'm doing that now.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, and it's more than Sally, it's Sally and Robert. And
Yep.
Just to touch, I'm sure we can start to go over the lines as we come up, but we are looking not only at a significant increase, all the payroll, health, taxes, MTA tax and such like that. We're also looking at a significant increase in both principal and interest we're going to be paying on bonds this year.
You know, if I could just chime in, one piece of information given by Jerry earlier this evening was really shocking to me, and that was the 81% benefits on top of payroll. That is so far out of line with anything in the commercial world that it really took me aback.
That's because government pays such low salaries, though, Bill, as a former government employee.
Yeah, but 81% is outrageous.
I'll say.
Well, that's like, when you talk about the pension, New York State, when they took over the pensions, one of the reasons they got the unions to go along with it is they guarantee a return. I think whatever it is, 7%. If you don't make the 7% return, it's out of our pockets. So no matter what happens, stock market goes up, stock market goes down, no matter what happens. That number might be a little bit aggressive because understand Andrew Cuomo right now is trying to put forth the worst budget in the history of New York because he's trying to get as much money out of the feds as possible when it comes up. It says the stock market has actually been done very well. So I'm not quite, some of the we're not talking about healthcare, we're talking about the pension money. I'm not sure if the pension money might not come in a little bit better than what's being projected by the state.
Yeah, but I think they're restricted as to where they can invest the money.
Yeah,
So
well,
the stock market has done well doesn't mean anything.
No,
yeah,
they, they're not as restricted anymore, Ellen. They have a lot of different investments. They use
Okay.
private
Actually,
equity.
we can
They
always,
use a lot of the current, investment strategies that, they don't want to be relying on the stock market. They want to invest things that when the stock market goes down, that they're either going up or they're, staying the same kind of thing.
Yep.
Against the
Yeah.
markets up and down.
again,
I did pensions for the MTA, so I know what some of what the public sector, the big institutions are doing.
again, what the New York State pension funds actually is out is a public record. We can always go and look in New York State and actually see the conditions of those funds at some point in the year.
Well, they're always telling me my pension is well funded, so.
Yes. So Ed, you're feeling pretty comfortable, huh?
Yeah. Well, there's also, the other thing about the state and the city pensions is they're guaranteed.
Yeah.
The city and the state have put a guarantee on them that you're going to get it for the rest of your life, no matter what, according to the guarantee.
And you're guaranteed a certain percent of cost of living increase.
Yes, now we are because they enacted it. Yeah, it becomes part of the contract that's guaranteed.
Yeah. Look, yeah, I was feeling bad before, but if it's going to add, what the heck? Let's add 2 more percent.
Did anyone have anything else at this point they wanted to discuss? Or?
Did you want to look at where we are with this year's budget at all?
Well, I think that's a question that Len had raised initially is what document is available that's going to enable us to analyze that in more simple terms, if you will, to really be able to get to that bottom line. I don't know if
we actually have an update of all revenues and all expenditures as part of the last budget document we got. So we now have our expenses up to February 5th.
Well, the other thing they said at the meeting is that there is a document that, I forget who forgot to send it to us, maybe Jerry, but the document where they project where we're gonna end up this year, which, how revenue is coming in and expenses are, an analysis of that, we didn't get. So that, I mean, it may help us understand some of the basis for their proposed budget going, for 2021, 22.
Like I said, I agree with the projection. We're probably gonna be around $4 million with the sales tax. The problem is the revenue from the railroads and other revenues. We still need $2.2 million worth of revenues coming in. And that's something we have to monitor. The revenues from fines and forfeitures is still very low. The courts are closed again. Revenue for rental of space at the train station, I don't think we're gonna see a significant increase in that. The other thing is on the expenditure side, we have a lot of lines that are starting to push, where their limit is. The way I look at it right now, because what you can do is you can look at what a line has currently spent, then what you can go and you can look at their personnel costs and just times their personnel costs by a third, because that's
Right, but
what's
on the plus side, Glenn, there's a whole lot of, throughout the entire budget, a whole lot of very small line items where we've spent nothing.
Yeah.
And the budget may be 2,500, 3,000, a lot of that all adds up.
Yeah, but there's lines we're gonna go over. Legal is gonna go
Yep.
over significantly.
Yep.
Rec is gonna be going over slightly, and the 800-pound gorilla in the room is, and we're gonna see this number come in starting next Friday, and next meeting is our snow budget is completely blown. We are gonna be significantly over on the snow budget.
Except that we were told tonight that we're gonna be under, so I don't understand.
Time will tell.
There's no way. What they said was that they increased it next year when you asked about the decrease. I mean, that's not what I saw. I saw a slight decrease not from the original budget, but from the adjusted budget for the snow. I saw a slight decrease in that line for this year, because they increased it a little bit. And then next year, the tentative budget had it back to where the original budget was this year. And again, that's based on, the last 2 years when we haven't really had any snow. This year's line, and it doesn't matter, Village of Mamaroneck, it doesn't matter where you are. Everybody's snow budget is blown because you had a 72-hour storm. If you actually look at the budget, before the storm, we only had $60,000 left to pay overtime to personnel. And you've probably been paying them overtime virtually the week, because even the nights that after the snowstorm, you have to pay to have all that snow removed from Mamaroneck Avenue. They usually bring a crew in like 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night, and then they'll be cleaning the snow up until 6 to 8 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, you see the budget right there is 143. The adjusted was 169, and then if you look at the tentative, it's back to 243. And if you look at personnel, what we're paying for the snow personnel, we had actually taken $8,000 out to pay overtime for the leaf removal. So adjusted budget 91,000, you've already spent 38,000 of that. So that leaves you with what, $53,000 in overtime. I am pretty confident that we went through that overtime over the last week or so.
I'm not going to argue with that one.
You know, we did or we didn't. We'll see.
Like I said, that you'll see on Friday. That would be the first check to deal with the snowstorms. You know, basically you're getting paid a week after, you know, you work your time. They calculate it. So that will appear with the trustees. If we're actually over that budget, that would be on the trustees' next agenda because they will have to make a transfer to that line. So you'll know exactly where you're sitting with that. And unfortunately, we are still in a period, at least for the next 2 or 3 weeks, where we have a cycle of snow every 2 or 3 days.
I think we've talked a bit about this, but with this report, you know, if at some point it can be elaborated upon with maybe a more functional variance column, where, you know, you could see the delta, you could have a percent complete. You'd be able maybe even to trend it based on what month in the year you're at. I mean, because we're kind of doing this in our head as we go through,
Yeah.
knowing what month we're in. And I think I mean, you can see there's some capability here that looks like it's not being utilized in the far right column, but I think that one column showing the variance at the very least would be helpful.
Yeah, like I said, the biggest part of a lot of these lines is what you're paying for the personnel. And if you take out the overtime and if you adjust for an employee that left, like the Parks Department, if you just simply take the salaries and times them by 33%, you know, at the very least, you're liable to pay the last third of the year of somebody's salary. And then you can get an idea of how much money is left in the line for all other. That's why I say the rec department is going to go over, because if you did that calculation with the rec department, it leaves them $17,000 for the rest of the year. Parks Department is, you know, on the high side. The waste sanitation collection is up there. The police department is spent more than that on their personnel, and we're about to get you know, the nice part is we just got revenue for details, but we're going to have to pay the expense of those details on the expense side. So we're about to get hit. We'll be getting hit with that. So, is there savings in the budget? Absolutely. If you want to start to go through it a little bit, there's savings in engineering at this point. There's savings in the village court at this point. Your sororities has some money in it, but I don't know if the director case is going to be solved this year. If so, that could eat that up. Planning department, we are down one person. You might have $100,000 in the end available there, but literally you're searching each line, and if your legal goes over and your snow goes over, all of a sudden, a lot of those little puddles of 3,000 here, 5,000 there are going to disappear.
Yeah.
So,
In certain cases too, consultants are replacing the employees, like in planning. So, you know, they hired a planning consultant. cheaper than Greg, but
Yeah.
yeah,
But that cost is gonna still be there.
yeah, there's gonna be some left.
And the engineering cost, I'm not exactly sure when, some of the engineering contracts, I think a lot of them are gonna end up under, capital anyway, but we do have projects that we, have, contracted engineering for. So, that's gonna be eaten up a little bit by consultants too. But there's 4 months left in the year, and if at the end of every month, they're going to be updating their revenue and expense report, as Jerry said, you can just follow it. And as for any expenses outside personnel, they're all in the audit of the bills. But the other thing that you have to be aware of is there's certain items that are purchased that we do not yet have. We do not yet know how we have paid for it. And my biggest example is in the 2 meetings in January, or the last meeting in January, first meeting in February, we bought 2 sanitation trucks for $465,000, and they haven't been able to tell me how the funding is on that. Basically, you're sitting at $500,000. We have a police chief car ordered. I'm not sure if we're going to be getting it by the end of the year, but when we receive that, that's another $65,000.
What they will do is they will pay for it out of surplus and then fold it into a bond issue and replenish the surplus afterwards. That's how they do it.
And that's, one of the things I discussed with Dan is when they talk about anything in the capital budget, what we need to do is follow. We need to see, have they approved the project? Have they paid for the project? And once the project is paid for, is it going to be paid for out of general funds? Is it going to be paid for by a grant of some sort? Or is it going to be paid for by bonding? And we're going to have to keep track of the bonding. And, it says when it comes to the capital fund, we have to be aware of, we can't keep spending, $5, $6, $7 million a year when we're only paying back $3.5 million on, or $3 million on principal. Because eventually
I
those
understand.
have to be paid.
That's very important. I think Len's point about the staff growing faster than whatever is exceedingly important. I also, what we did raise at the meeting, the budget meeting, is to look at the funds. I've asked that the OV supply us with a spreadsheet for the next 5 years of what's anticipated for the water fund, i.e. Westchester Waterworks expenditures in terms of capital, because last night we approved 7 projects, 5 of which are not on the hit list for the future, all with over 100,000 or about 100,000 or more. All of this is a significant issue. So, and by resolution, I'm told that the water fund cannot exceed $1 million. So this places a very significant issue on our taxpayers as well.
Yeah, if we could take a look at that in advance of the capital budget work session, that would be great.
So anyway, so we there's a lot of food on the table.
Mhm.
I think the points that you've made are good. I think to the extent, Charles, that you can coordinate getting questions, together in writing, regarding, or policy or both, and getting it, maybe we can submit it beforehand so people don't feel they're totally blindsided. But I think that it's important, these are important issues. I think, Jerry was, I think, very helpful, as was staff, in trying to explain that, how they, what their approach was in creating the numbers. And I think, it's incumbent on us to talk about how, how to proceed, and whether we're comfortable or not, then, then the board will have to make up its mind. But I don't think, I think for the first time, the Board of Trustees that is really looking at a budget rather than just, okay.
Yeah, I think both Nora, Dan, and Victor are really starting to look into the weeds. Victor was very much active, starting to dig through numbers.
He's on the phone, so watch what you say, Glenn.
That's what I'm saying. Nothing but good. I'm looking to butter him up.
Okay, good.
Victor, do you or Dan or the board have any questions for us or additional topics or items that we could be of help with helping you unpack, given all the information in front of you?
Well, I just say,
I don't think Victor is still on. I think he is left. I know.
Right there, Dan, right above you.
Yes.
I'm here just to thank you for having
Oh,
me.
okay, there you are, but you're not appearing on my screen anywhere. Oh, there you are. I guess you just popped up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
having me as a guest, I would say my only comment is that document that was mentioned by Ed actually is relevant. It's important. It was good to hear your thought process, how engaged you are, and we'll definitely need comments, your help. I would looking forward to more of that, and just thank you for having me. So I just want to keep us a guest. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, and
Appreciate it.
there is one question. I spoke to Dan about this. It's gonna have to be a decision by the trustees whether we have a day camp this year. And the significance of that is the rec department, I think, is even adding one person. And a significant amount of the work done by the rec department is running the day camp. And if we aren't gonna have a day camp this year, and we're not gonna have a day camp until the following spring, basically you probably have a couple of staff people that literally you have them there for a year with not much to do.
Well, I think it depends how far in advance they hire people for the,
Yeah, well, I'm saying it says it's February now. Even if they start dealing with the day camp February next year, that's a year of, you still got 4 staff members, and it's just a lot, it's a lot of personnel when you're not running the day camp, which is probably the single largest item that you'd be doing.
So Glenn, I'll just, if I may, this is again, and first of all, I hope you get well soon. I'm sure they're feeding you well. They're treating you very well there, because I always see you very articulated, but today you're right at the top. So, it's just fun to see you. But all your comments are very well, focused. And as you just said, it's knowing the weeds that's very important. I think the rec department, even if they don't do, for example, the camp, they are very agile. They move and they're supporting other programs. So getting to know those the
Yeah,
programs well, the department well, and if at least
it's
some of
not
you.
about it's not about laying people off, Victor, but if there's an opening in the Parks Department right now, and we could take somebody from the Rec Department and put them there, and eventually when you have the extra work of the camp, move them back to the Rec Department instead of actually hiring somebody, that will help our budget.
But I think also, Glenn, one of the things Jason has done over the last few months is to come up with additional programs.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff he's come up with, there's been a fee for. So I think if we keep letting Jason be creative, that additional person will be put to good use. That may end up producing revenue for us.
Okay, well, yeah, again, that's a question we can ask if the camp's
Yep.
not going on. What additional can these people do to just justify the fact that there's no camp this year? I don't have a problem, but it's just, something you have to be aware of. If
Yep.
Other activities for them to do, I have absolutely no problem with that. In fact, maybe it's the year that we have some extra time and we can institute maybe some other program.
Yeah, I think that's how the kayaking thing came about.
Yeah, the kayak has been absolutely brilliant, a huge source of revenue.
Yep. And people enjoyed it. So it was a win-win.
Yes, absolutely.
Does anyone have anything else for this evening?
The only other thing I would mention is, I think that we have to look at what the revenue benefits are versus the cost to obtain those benefits.
Yep.
And whether we look at it short term, long term, and how that fits into how you create the budget. The parking on the post road is, the question is, how much revenue can you really come out of it, and what's the net? It's the same thing with, the expansion of the kayak program, et cetera. I'm not suggesting that these are good programs. I'm not suggesting that they're bad programs. I'm just suggesting that we need to be careful, and I would behoove you all to take a look at the cost benefits of what we are, ratios of what we are doing.
Right. And it's not just the cost benefit, it's a break-even analysis.
Yeah,
That's a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
that has to include all benefits that are associated with the people working on them.
Yep.
I was surprised to learn that we are the fees that we are charging for maintenance of the fields are 50% of our costs.
Yeah.
That totally surprised me.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked to hear that too.
And
I wasn't, years ago when they used to do budget, they didn't even take into account a capital cost. I was on the budget committee back then, and we were trying to figure out the cost of things like softball, and I go, well, how much does it cost to have the lights on the field? And they would just look at you dead-eyed. So they have gotten much better, but again, the maintenance of fields, if every 5 years you have to redo the infield of the baseball field, that has to be part of what your overall cost of field maintenance is, and
Yep.
it has to be spread through anywhere between little league and fall softball, summer softball, and whoever else uses the field.
okay,
Anyone have anything else?
I hope everybody is doing better than me at this point.
Well, we
get
hope
get well soon.
you
Yeah,
get
you'll be
home
back.
tomorrow.
Hopefully I'm home tomorrow, busy emailing and everything. Thank you for indulging me, obviously after 7 days here. A little bit lonely, so a little bit talkative.
Oh,
Charles, you need to close the meeting with a motion.
Yep. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
all.
Be safe and
No, I'll have to, no, I have to figure out how to close the, Zoom.
There you go.
Uh-oh.
There I go. Good night, everybody.
good
All
night.
night.
Take care.
right,
night.
come on, Dan, we're gonna wait.
Are you saving the best for last?
Yeah, well, yes, we'll wait. You gotta wait until Dan cuts us off.
I'm trying to figure out, well, I'm gonna just do what they said, but it doesn't, oh, here it is. Here's the,
One to go.
oh, that's the wrong button. That's the
Now
wrong
he's
button.
back.
Here it is, here, just a minute.
This is your encore before it's on. Well, I know what to do. Why don't I just turn off my iPhone and then I'm gone?
We could all
That's
do
what
that.
that's what they,
We just don't want to desert Dan.
Isn't there like a leave button, that says?
yeah,
Yep.
that's what they say to do, but we'll see what happens.